Keanu Reeves's lost love. The silent pain that forged his soul. The world knows Keanu Reeves as a man of strength, calmness, and humility. His face is often quiet, his smile gentle, and his words few. But behind those calm eyes lives a story that shaped him in ways few people could imagine. It is a story of love, of loss, and of silent pain that turned into resilience. It is a story that explains why kindness became his strength and why humility became his shield. The first time Keanu truly understood the weight of life was not when fame came to him, but when love entered his heart in a way that felt unshakable. He met her during a time when he was still trying to balance his life between being a rising actor and a simple man who just wanted peace. She was different from the world he knew. She did not care about fame or the flashing lights. She cared about sincerity, about small things like laughter at midnight, long walks in the cold, and music that made silence beautiful. For the first time, Keanu felt safe, as if life had gifted him something pure. But destiny has a strange way of testing those who love deeply. Their love grew, but so did the shadows of fate. It began with small moments of tension, moments that seemed harmless, yet whispered of something larger. Sometimes she grew quiet without reason. Sometimes her eyes looked past him as if hiding a truth she could not share. Keanu, with his gentle heart, never pressed too hard. He believed that love should give space, that love should not demand answers before the time is right. Still, deep inside, he knew something was coming. It was like walking through a field of flowers but hearing thunder in the distance. He wanted to hold on to every second with her, even as the sound of that thunder grew louder. Then came the day when the world around him changed forever. He was preparing for a role, his mind half in the world of cinema and half in the quiet world, he shared with her. She called him to sit with her, and her voice was calm but heavy. Her words fell like stones in the still water of his soul. She told him about the truth she had carried in silence. It was about her health, a silent fight she had kept hidden. In that moment, Keanu's breath left him. It was not anger that filled him, but helplessness. He wanted to fight the battle for her, but this was not a battle that fists or even money could win. It was a battle of patience, resilience, and faith. He held her hand and promised her only one thing. He promised he would never leave, never turn his back, and never let her face the storm alone. And true to his word, he stayed. He stayed through the nights when pain silenced laughter. He stayed through the mornings when tears tried to hide behind forced smiles. He stayed even when the world demanded his presence in the spotlight because he knew his heart was with her, not with fame. But the storm grew stronger. Her strength was remarkable, but her body was fragile. Keanu saw her fading, not in spirit, but in life. He tried to capture every smile, every touch, every quiet whisper, as if storing them deep in his soul. When the day finally came, when her hand slipped from his, the silence around him was unbearable. The world outside continued to move, but his world had shattered. Reporters, cameras, fans, all wanted him to perform, to smile, to be the actor they admired. But inside, he was carrying a grief too heavy to show. Keanu did not cry for the world to see. His tears were private. His grief was silent. Yet this pain did not destroy him. Instead, it carved something powerful inside him. It carved humility. It carved respect for the fragility of life, and it carved a deep kindness that would later be seen by millions who crossed his path. The story of his lost love was not just about sorrow. It was about transformation. It was about a man who faced unbearable loss and chose to turn it into strength rather than bitterness. It was about choosing resilience when the easier path was despair. And from that silent pain, the world slowly began to notice something unusual about Keanu Reeves. In interviews, in small encounters, in the way he spoke to strangers, he carried a quiet respect for every soul he met. He knew that behind every smile there could be a hidden story, just like his own. He knew that kindness was never wasted. Because life was unpredictable and short, his lost love became the silent force that shaped the man the world admires today. And though he never speaks of her often, those who look closely at his journey can see her presence in the choices he makes, in the humility he carries, and in the patience that defines him. This was only the beginning of the journey, a journey that would test him further, bring him more challenges, and show the world how true resilience is born not in comfort, but in heartbreak. The weight of silence after her passing, Keanu's life felt like a room without light. The silence in his apartment was heavy, as if the walls themselves carried the memory of her voice. He would sit in the same chair where she once rested, his eyes staring at the empty space that once carried laughter. Every object in the house reminded him of her favorite book lying unfinished, a scarf folded on the couch, a picture frame that seemed to whisper stories of better days. Many people think that grief fades with time, but for Keanu, it stayed like a quiet shadow that followed him everywhere. He did not drown himself in noise or distractions. Instead, he walked straight into the silence, carrying his sorrow with him. It was not weakness, but a choice. He believed pain should not be denied, but respected. His friends worried for him. They told him to go out, to forget, to move forward. But Keanu did not want to forget. Forgetting, to him, felt like betraying her memory. He chose instead to honor her by living in a way that reflected what she believed in: kindness, patience, and love. But the world around him was not patient. Hollywood was demanding. Directors wanted his focus, studios wanted his presence, fans wanted his smile. And so, Keanu carried his grief quietly, showing the world his strength while his heart was still broken. He would arrive at sets on time, perform with discipline, and then disappear into the night without celebration. People began to notice something different about him. While others craved attention, Keanu stayed away from the spotlight. While others enjoyed fame, he chose humility. At first, many thought it was strange. Some even whispered that he was cold or distant. But those who looked closer saw something deeper. They saw a man who carried scars but never used them as an excuse to hurt others. One night, while filming away from home, Keanu sat alone in his hotel room. Outside, the city was alive with neon lights, laughter, and music. But inside, he sat in silence, holding a small note she had once written for him. The note was simple. No matter what happens, remember that love never dies, it only changes form. Those words became a guiding light. Whenever the pain grew too heavy, he would remember them. They reminded him that though she was gone, her love still lived inside him. It lived in his choices, in his actions, and in the kindness he could give to others. But fate was not finished with him. Just when his heart was learning to breathe again, life tested him once more. He received news that shook his very core, a tragedy that would strike his family and leave him questioning the fairness of life itself. It was not enough that he had lost his love. Now he was forced to face another wound. The night he received that call, Keanu sat in darkness. His phone slipped from his hands, his body frozen, his mind refusing to accept what he had heard. For a long time, he did not move. It felt as if the universe was pushing him to the edge, daring him to break. But Keanu did not break. He bent. He suffered. He cried in silence, but he did not let despair consume him. Instead, he whispered to himself the same promise he had made long ago, to never run from pain, to never let sorrow turn into bitterness. This second tragedy carved even deeper lines of humility into his soul. It stripped away the illusions of control and left him with one simple truth, that life was fragile and every moment mattered. On the outside, Hollywood still saw a man of discipline and talent. But inside, Keanu was walking through storms, most People would never understand. Yet through those storms, he found something rare. He found resilience, the kind that comes only when everything else is taken away. And slowly, people began to feel it. In the way he spoke, in the way he treated strangers, in the way he carried himself with patience. It was as if his silent pain had transformed into a light that guided others. Little did he know, this path of suffering would prepare him for the future. It would shape the choices he made, the projects he worked on, and the way he touched millions of lives without ever raising his voice. Walking through storm. After the second tragedy, Keanu felt as though the world had taken away the ground beneath his feet. He walked through each day with a weight that few could carry, but he carried it anyway. He did not share his suffering with the cameras or the media. Instead, he kept it locked inside, showing the world only glimpses of the man he still was. But grief has its way of reshaping people. Keanu noticed changes in himself. He no longer enjoyed crowded rooms filled with shallow conversations. The laughter of Hollywood parties felt distant, almost meaningless. Instead, he found comfort in quiet places, in bookstores, in long walks at night, in the company of strangers who expected nothing from him. Sometimes he would ride the subway like any ordinary man. He would sit among workers, students, and tired faces returning home after long days. Most of them did not even recognize him, and those who did were surprised to see a movie star living so simply. But for Keanu, those quiet subway rides were more than travel. They were a way to remind himself that he was not above anyone, that fame was only a mask, and that true humanity lived in small, ordinary moments. Still, there were nights when his pain returned like a storm. He would wake in the dark hours, hearing echoes of laughter that no longer existed. His heart would ache, his hands would shake, and he would struggle to find peace. Sometimes he wondered why life had chosen him for such deep sorrow. Yet each time, he reminded himself of the promise he carried, that pain should never turn into anger, and grief should never turn into hate. But fate, once again, was not finished with him. In the middle of his journey through loss, Hollywood placed before him roles that demanded strength, focus, and emotion. And strangely, those roles became more than just performances. They became mirrors of his own life. When he played characters who had lost everything, he was not acting. He was remembering. When he portrayed resilience, it was not fiction. It was survival. People who watched his films began to feel something different. They could sense a rawness in his eyes, a truth in his silence, a pain that was too real to be imagined. Audiences were moved not only by the stories he played, but by the story he carried within himself. Without ever speaking of it, he gave his pain to his art. And in return, his art gave comfort to millions who also carried silent wounds. Yet Keanu's greatest strength was not found in films or fame. It was found in the way he treated others outside the spotlight. Stories began to spread. Of him giving up his seat on buses, of him speaking kindly to strangers, of him sharing his earnings with crew members who worked behind the scenes. Each act was simple, yet powerful. He was teaching the world a truth, without saying a word, that respect, kindness, and humility are stronger than any fame. But even as he gave light to others, he continued to fight shadows within himself. Loneliness still lived in him. Sometimes he would sit in cafes watching couples laugh, friends talk, and families share meals, and a quiet ache would rise in him. He did not envy them, but he carried a longing for something he once had and lost forever. Then came a day when life surprised him. During a quiet evening, as he walked down a street hidden from the noise of cameras, he saw a stranger struggling with heavy bags. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, offered his help, and carried the weight for her. She thanked him with a smile that reminded him of warmth he thought he had lost forever. It was a small moment, almost forgettable to most people. But for Keanu, It was like a door opening just a little, letting in light after years of darkness. He realized something important that night. Though love may never return in the same way, kindness always finds a path back into life. And with that realization, Keanu began to see his journey differently. Instead of living as a man broken by pain, he chose to live as a man rebuilt by compassion. His storms were still there, but now he carried an umbrella of resilience, and through him, others found shelter too. The man. The world began to notice as years passed. Keanu's life remained a balance between two worlds, the bright, demanding light of Hollywood and the quiet, hidden shadows of his personal grief. But something unusual began to happen. People started noticing the way he moved through life differently than other stars. While many actors enjoyed the attention, Keanu seemed to run from it. While others sought luxury, he chose simplicity. Stories began to spread, not through headlines, at first, but through whispers of people who had met him. Someone would say, "I saw Keanu sitting alone in a small cafe, drinking tea like any ordinary man." Another would tell, "He gave his seat on the subway without anyone asking, and he didn't care who was watching." Slowly, these stories painted a picture of a man who carried fame but never let it control him. Behind the cameras, Keanu's humility became legendary. During film sets, while other stars hid inside private trailers, he would sit with the crew, sharing meals, listening to their stories, treating them as equals. He gave gifts without telling the world, donated to charities without attaching his name, and often walked away before anyone could thank him. It was not about recognition, it was about respect. But what the public did not know was that these acts of kindness were not only for others, they were also for himself. They were his way of surviving grief. Each time he helped someone, each time he showed compassion, it was like a small stitch on the wound of his own heart. He knew he could not bring back what he had lost, but he could give meaning to his pain by turning it into light for others. Yet fame was not always kind to him. Reporters often tried to dig into his private life, asking questions about his sorrow, about the tragedies he had endured. Keanu always answered with silence. He believed pain was sacred, that grief should not be used as entertainment. Instead of speaking about himself, he spoke about life, about the importance of respect, about how everyone deserves dignity. Fans grew curious. Why was this man, who had suffered so much, still so gentle? Why was he not bitter, angry, or broken? The answer was simple, because he chose to be different. He chose humility over pride, resilience over despair, and kindness over bitterness. One moment in particular revealed the depth of his character. During the filming of a movie, a young fan came to meet him. She was nervous, her hands trembling, as she held out a piece of paper for an autograph. Instead of rushing, Keanu sat down with her, asked her name, and spoke to her as if she was the only person in the world. To him, she was not a fan, not a stranger, but a human being who deserved respect. That moment stayed with her forever, and soon her story spread like fire across the world. Every small act became a mirror of his soul. He never needed to shout about who he was. People could see it in his patience, in his eyes, in the way he carried himself with quiet dignity. But even as the world admired him, Keanu never let admiration heal his wounds. He knew that grief was not something to be erased, but something to be lived with. Some nights he still sat alone, looking at the stars, remembering the love he lost and wondering what life might have been if fate had been kinder. Those nights kept him grounded, reminding him that pain never fully disappears. It only teaches you how to live differently. And so, the man who had lost so much began to inspire millions, not through grand speeches or loud actions, but through his silence, his humility, and his endless kindness. The world saw an actor, but those who looked closer saw a soul forged by suffering, transformed into strength. When art became truth, there came a time when Hollywood demanded more from Keanu. He was offered roles that were not just about action or drama, but about characters who carried deep wounds. To many actors, such roles were a challenge. To Keanu, they were reflections of his own life. He did not need to imagine grief. He carried it. He did not need to pretend resilience. He lived it every day. When he stepped into these characters, audiences felt something raw. His silence spoke louder than words. His eyes carried sorrow that could not be faked. Even when scripts asked him to play a hero, what people saw was a man who had suffered and still stood strong. And that truth connected with millions. They saw themselves in him. They saw their own silent struggles mirrored in his performance. But it was not only about films. Behind the scenes, Keanu was shaping a different kind of legacy. He shared his success with others, often giving away large portions of his earnings, so that the crew, the people who worked hard but remained unseen, could live better lives. It was an act few knew about, but those who did never forgot. To him, money was never the true reward. The true reward was knowing he had made life easier for someone else. And yet, even during these moments of giving, his private grief followed him. Sometimes, while filming emotional scenes, memories of his lost love returned suddenly, almost like whispers calling from the past. His heart would ache, his mind would drift, and for a moment he would lose himself in the weight of it all. But instead of running from it, he let it stay. He let it guide his art, his choices, his very way of living. The turning point came when one particular film demanded both strength and vulnerability from him. On screen, he played a man who had been broken by loss but still fought for something greater. Audiences were moved deeply, but what they did not know was that Keanu was not only playing a role, he was reliving pieces of his own life. It was not fiction. It was truth wearing the mask of cinema. The world responded with admiration. Critics spoke of his authenticity, fans spoke of his honesty, and people who had never cared for films before began to watch, not because of the story, but because they wanted to understand the man behind the character. This period of his career became a reminder that art is at its most powerful when it is born from truth. And Keanu's truth was carved in silence, grief, humility, and resilience. Still, behind all the admiration, he never lost sight of who he was. When interviews praised him, he smiled gently but spoke little. When cameras followed him, he stayed humble, walking through life as though he were invisible. He refused to let fame rebuild the walls that grief had broken down. He wanted to stay close to people, close to kindness, close to the small things that mattered more than flashing lights. Yet the question always remained in his heart. How long could he carry the weight of his silent pain? Could kindness alone heal the wounds that still opened at night when he sat alone? Or was he destined to walk through life as a man admired by the world but haunted by his own ghosts? These questions lingered in his soul, unanswered, pushing him into deeper reflection. He knew the storms of life were not finished. More tests would come, and once again he would need to face them with the same quiet strength that had carried him this far. The echo of shadows. Just when life seemed to have given him a fragile balance between grief and peace, another unexpected twist arrived. Keanu had always believed that pain teaches patience, but he never imagined that even after years of carrying sorrow, fate could remind him once again of how fragile life truly is. One evening, after finishing a film shoot, he received news of a close friend's passing. The message felt like a cold knife reopening old wounds. This friend had stood by him in some of his darkest days, offering comfort when words failed. Now, that voice was gone forever. It was another cruel reminder that nothing in life was permanent. For days, Keanu withdrew from the world. He walked the streets quietly, his head lowered, blending into the crowd like any ordinary man. People passed him without knowing that the Figure beside them was a star admired by millions, but Keanu did not care for recognition. At that moment, he was simply a man walking with shadows, carrying yet another invisible loss. This loss was different. It did not break him the way his first tragedies had, but it awakened a fear inside him, that grief would always follow him, that life would continue to test him with more silence, more goodbyes, more empty spaces, and yet, in that fear, something changed. Instead of retreating into despair, Keanu made a choice. He decided that if life was going to keep testing him, then he would answer with even greater compassion. He began to speak more gently, listen more carefully, and give more of himself to others. One story spread about him during this time that touched millions. He was walking home late at night when he saw a homeless man sitting on the cold pavement holding a sign with tired hands. Instead of passing by, Keanu sat down beside him. They shared food, they spoke about life, and for those few hours, Keanu was not an actor and the man was not forgotten. They were simply two human beings sharing warmth in a world that often forgets kindness. This act was never meant for cameras, yet someone noticed and shared it with the world. Soon, millions admired him not just for his films, but for the way he lived his life when no one was watching. Still, even as he gave kindness to strangers, Keanu's nights remained heavy. The ghosts of his past visited often. He dreamed of his lost love, of the family he never fully had, of the friends he had buried along the way. Some mornings he would wake with tears on his face, wondering how much longer he could carry the weight. But each time he looked into the mirror, he reminded himself of one simple truth, that pain had shaped him, but it did not own him. He was not a prisoner of grief. He was a guardian of resilience. And in that belief, he found strength to move forward again and again. His art during these years carried even more depth. Audiences began to notice how his characters seemed more human, more fragile, more real than ever before. They saw the cracks in his silence, the weight in his eyes, and it moved them in ways few performances could. Without saying it, Keanu was teaching them that it is possible to live with pain and still choose kindness, still choose respect, still choose love. But deep inside, he knew there was still one more test waiting for him, a final challenge that would push him beyond what he thought he could endure. The echo of shadows was not over. It was only preparing him for what was to come. The legacy of silence time passed, but the wounds inside Keanu never fully healed. Grief has no ending. It only changes shape. Yet in his silence, in his patience, in his resilience, something extraordinary grew. He became more than an actor, more than a star. He became a symbol of how pain, when carried with humility, can transform into strength that touches millions. His journey had been full of storms, but each storm had carved a new lesson into his soul. When he lost his love, he learned the fragility of happiness. When tragedy struck his family, he learned the weight of survival. When friends left this world, he learned that time is never promised. And instead of letting these losses harden him, he let them soften him. His heart became a shelter for others, a reminder that even broken souls can give light. As his career grew, the world admired his roles, but what they admired more was his humanity. People told stories about him that spread across every corner of the globe. Stories of him giving away wealth quietly, of him sitting with strangers as if they were lifelong friends, of him walking the streets without bodyguards, choosing simplicity when he could have lived in luxury. Fans began to say that Keanu Reeves was different, that he carried an aura of peace even when surrounded by chaos. And they were right. His silent pain had forged his soul into something rare, a soul that respected every person, no matter how small, no matter how forgotten. But perhaps the most powerful part of his legacy was not found in headlines or stories told by others. It was found in the countless people who, after hearing his journey, chose to live with more kindness, A man in a crowded city would remember Keanu before shouting in anger. A woman grieving her own loss would think of his resilience and find the strength to stand again. A young person feeling invisible would look at him and realize that even the most admired carry hidden scars. Keanu never claimed to be a hero. He never asked the world to notice him. He simply lived with honesty, humility, and quiet respect for life. And in doing so, he became a hero to millions without ever trying. Sometimes, on quiet nights, he still sat alone under the stars. He would think of the love he lost, of the life that could have been, and for a moment, his eyes would fill with tears. But then he would smile softly, remembering the note she once wrote to him. Love never dies. It only changes form. And, in that moment, he understood that her love still lived, through him, through his choices, through the kindness he gave to the world. His silent pain had not destroyed him. It had shaped him. It had forged his soul into something unshakable, something eternal. And long after the cameras fade, long after the lights of Hollywood grow dim, the story of Keanu Reeves will remain. Not as a story of fame, but as a story of a man who carried loss with grace, who turned grief into kindness, and who taught the world that even in silence, love can live forever.